business tips to successfully start and run your business so your business doesn't run you. And more importantly, we provide personal development tools to create a better version of yourself to provide the solid foundation for your life and business to stand upon. This is the Biz Reveal, and I'm your host, Craig Sawyer. This week's episode is sponsored by Sawyer Health Solutions. Protecting what's important to you is what's important to us. Get your free health insurance quote at SawyerHealthSolutions.com. Communicating efficiently and effectively is challenging, but when not done well, it causes sales to be lost and meetings to drag on. Chaney explains how meetings can be better and shorter, how to improve internal and external communications, and how to fix these common issues with simple, practical tips and avoid the costly business problem no one ever notices. After the show, learn more at www.gettothedamnpoint.com. This is the Biz Reveal Podcast with this week's guest, Chaney. Get to the damn point, first of all, is just the coolest one-liner ever. And it pretty much sums up how I feel on a daily basis with a lot of conversations that I'm a part of. What does it mean for you? How did this come about for you?
This came about for me from a couple of different directions. First of all, I spent a lot of years working in television, many of those in television news. You've got a minute and a half to tell a story, which means you better get to the damn point. You can't drag it out. Except during sweeps, you have those long sweep pieces. But then I got into public speaking, those two worlds combined, and I realized not enough people are doing this. And there's a lot of things that it affects. It affects a whole lot of your world. So I decided, hey, why not just teach people how to get to the damn point?
Perfect. And this guy just got to the damn point. So you're going to notice that I do this a lot. So this is where some of my questions are going to come from today is I do ramble. And I find that I ramble because I don't feel like I'm articulating myself or explaining myself in the way that I'm trying to explain myself. So I end up repeating it multiple times over and over and over again in different ways to make sure that the person who's listening to me understands where I'm coming from. How does somebody like me fix that?
You know, the funny thing about that is because you're in a little bit different situation, the main thing for you would be look out for things like crutch words and using a lot of filler words and like, but, so, and all that. Your job as an interviewer, you're on the cuff. And that's a little bit different, a little more lenient for me from that standpoint, because I think about all the reporters I've worked with over the years. That's what you do, particularly asking that question a couple of different ways to make sure people understand what it is you're asking for. My wife absolutely hates that I do that because it's a natural holdover from what I did in television news. I'll ask her something. We'll be in an argument and then she'll say, "You've already asked me that." I'm like, I don't recall asking that because subconsciously, I guess I did, but maybe I didn't get the answer I wanted. So I'm asking again a different way.
Right.
But as for you in doing that, you're flowing with what's going on in the conversation. And that's what I'm talking about. This should be, is it should be a conversation, even if you're just the one speaking. So what you're doing conversationally will be fine. If you repeat a little bit here and there, it's okay.
Okay. So I agree with that. And in conversation or in doing, interviews or, like a podcast conversation, things like that. In my professional life where I'm giving meetings, and that kind of thing, or trainings, my trainings are pretty notorious for going long, right? Nobody wants a training or a meeting to go long. None of us look forward to it. So in those types of environments, what are some tips that you provide to prevent that from happening?
The first thing I'll tell you, and it's one of the easiest things, and it's one of the things a lot of people will tell you, make an agenda. Know exactly what you're going to talk about and hit your points. You don't have to remember everything you're going to say or memorize everything, but you definitely want to have a layout of what it is you're going to talk about and what you're going to address, the key points, and hit those key points. Now, if things flow, you have something come in you want to throw in that matters, especially if it's a really good story, you certainly want to do that. But one of the big key things for me that people don't do, and one of the things I discovered in doing this, is just how much, and I know you've been there, man, you're bound to have been there. You've been in these situations where people get up there and they drone forever and they do a lot of the, I want to talk about this. I have seen CEOs of companies at chamber events just be excruciating with that. And the thing that I discovered was a lot of people look at that from the standpoint of, okay, it cloudies up your message. You can't really get your stuff across if you're not being coherent. But it does worse than that. It eats your time. You wouldn't believe how much those little things, and when you're up here interviewing, it may be different than when you're presenting. Is it different for you when you're presenting?
Oh, a ton different. It's like a completely different thing altogether.
Okay. So when you're up there and you're presenting, you may have more of these disfluencies in there. And what I discovered was how much time they eat up. And that's something that I've looked on the web. I can't find it. Nobody else has looked at it from the direction I'm looking at it, including some of the more prestigious speaking organizations out there. They look at things from how long your speech is. Did you talk X number of minutes? You have to fill this much time. But when you start having these disfluencies, and I don't know if you checked out on my website, I've got one of a lady that I recorded. She was on TV talking about something for her work. In a 5-minute span is how long her interview was. She used over 70 of these fill words, well, but, like, so, over and over. I cut it down. I edited this down to the point to where it was just the anchor taken out and her speaking. 3 minutes and 11 seconds is how long she spoke. Then I cut it even more than that. I took it down to just those words. And those words ate up 37 seconds of her time.
Just
37 seconds out of 3 minutes and 11.
Wow.
You what?
Yeah, just those words added up to that.
Oh, yeah. And if she had been speaking for a half an hour, she'd have lost 6 minutes of content time. 6 minutes just on this alone. So the very first thing I do is I tell people about this because they don't think it's a big deal. Well, everybody says and Sure they do. But you shouldn't say it as much that it causes a problem where it's costing you that much time. Right. And that's one of the first things I attack.
So the ahs and ums, and I'm in a lot of different podcast groups, like on Facebook and things like that. No, whenever anybody's talking about editing, that's the thing. My God, I've never realized how much I say And I do have the issue where just before I start talking, I'll do and then it's just a really quick and I go into it. One of my biggest pet peeves, that one doesn't bother me as much because I don't think I do it excessively. Some people use that word like over and over and over again. Where did that come from? And how do we stop people from doing it?
It's funny you mentioned this. I listened to another podcast just the other day. Alan Weiss, who's a speaker. I absolutely love Alan Weiss and what he does and what he stands for, his contrarian way of looking at the world. And he brought this very subject up about the word like, that it is so overused. But just like any other word, here's how you get rid of it. I'm going to help you get rid of your little starter thing that you're doing, and I'm going to help you get rid of the word like right now.
Okay.
Stop, drop, and pause. You learned about stop, drop, and roll when you were a kid. Catch on fire, stop, drop, and roll. And stop, drop, and pause, it's going to happen. So when you hear that word coming up, you're about to say it. Stop. Just shut up. Don't say anything. Drop whatever that filler word or phrase is or that little that's coming up. Just silence yourself and pause. Pausing does two things. It allows people to catch up to what you're saying and allows you a chance to catch up to what you were saying. And silence is golden for a reason, guys, because it has value. You don't have to fill the airwaves with everything.
And that's not more important ever as what I'm learning with interviewing. And I'm new at this. I've only been doing the podcasting thing for a year. So interviewing is a skill and I'm still improving on it and things like that. And I tell you what, people like Joe Rogan, I know people bring up Joe Rogan a lot, especially in the podcasting world, but there's a reason. The guy is good. He can give an interview, which, and it seems like he's not even asking questions. So it's not a question, answer kind of thing. He just he's very knowledgeable. The guy is smart. He meets a lot of really cool people and learns from all of them, but he's able to use that knowledge to add his own influence or, take on the conversation. So it doesn't feel like it's a back and forth interview. But sometimes when I'm interviewing people, the person that I'm interviewing doesn't exactly volunteer a lot of information. So I feel like I do need to fill in that space. If you have situations like that happening where they're just not terribly talkative folks and you do need to fill it in and you're like trying to create something, I think that's when those ahs and ums come from because it's like synonymous. I'm trying to think of something. So I have to use the word while I'm thinking.
I'll tell you a lot of what happens with that. Here's a little key for you on that. We used to have that happen a lot in news. Man, you'd go to interview somebody and you ask them this big long thing and they go, yep.
Exactly.
and you're done.
Thanks.
Or there was one, I got one of the best ones. You'll appreciate this from somebody who's done this. Did a live shot one time with a guy. He had two people standing on each side of him. And he had talked to these people beforehand. He had, was really cool with them. They were great with him. It was at this home show we were doing. We get live on the air. The little light goes on the camera to say, hey, we're hot. We hear on the two-way, hey, we're hot. He turns to this woman he's been talking to this whole time. And he says, so blah, blah, blah about this. And she does this number. Frozen. Completely, dude, locked up, frozen. Did not utter a word. He tried a second question, and all she did.
Wait, was that the camera fright just got to her?
Oh, yeah. She was frozen like a deer, man. So I just kind of panned over, and we went to the second person. But I kid you not, we come back, she's still standing there. And as soon as it was over, she was talking again.
Yeah.
So if you have that kind of a situation happen, it's okay to ask the questions. Another thing that I think you've probably already picked up, and if you haven't, you will, is playing off what somebody else says. You may have a list of questions, but if somebody says something interesting, just pick up and play on whatever it is they're talking about. The conversation may not take the full path you want it to, but you can always bring it back to one of your questions later. Just keep it conversational. It doesn't matter if you get a little distracted in there. It's just if you start hearing yourself doing these things, and I promise you, once you start hearing yourself doing these things, you will not be able to unhear it, and you'll fix it yourself.
And I think that's the key, right? Is knowing that you're doing it in the first place, right? Realizing that you have those mannerisms. And a lot of people will tell you, I don't like listening to the sound of my voice, right? Because we all sound different recorded than we do inside of our own heads, because we're hearing ourselves, that you got the vibrations going on inside your head and all that stuff. So we hear ourselves differently than other people hear us. And then we hear our real voice. We're like, what? I sound that bad? But like you said, listening to the conversation, and that's, I think, one of the parts that's missing and we're going to get to like meeting stuff and stuff like that here in a second, but in like interviewing type situations, active listening is tremendously important. Like, actually pay attention to what the people are saying to you, because the questions should come from the conversation, not necessarily from the list. I keep a list of questions just so I can kind of keep us on track. Or if there's a dead area, you got to have something to fall back on, right? So I think the active listening is most important. One of the things that came to my mind when I first read your bio and what we're going to be talking about today, about get to the damn point, is some of the most interesting people that I've had conversations with, whether in life, on the podcast, at work, doesn't matter. They're great storytellers. And they're interesting people because they're just really good at telling stories. But telling stories takes time. So how does that fit in to the get to the damn point thing and still being able to use a story to explain what your point is?
Interesting you asked that, because there's a couple of different ways to come at storytelling. You're right. You can have that story that you've told 1,000 times, and when you tell it at the party, it kills, and maybe it's a 10-minute long story. You may find places in your life where that happens. But the other thing about a story is it doesn't have to be long. It can be something very succinct. Give you an example. My ex-mother-in-law used to work at a hospital. She had to sometimes take over filling in for people who were coming into the hospital, checking them in, right? One day she's in there. The place is full. This woman has this little child, like 4 years old, this little boy. He's rambunctious. He's running around. He's jumping up and down. Finally, the mom is just done with this child. She goes over, picks him up, pops him down in a chair, and says, now sit there. The kid starts crying and says, Mom, you broke my balls. Place lost it. Everybody's on the floor crying. This mom is turning 8 shades of red. Kid stands up, reaches in his back pockets and pulls out 2 ping pong balls, smash flat. A story like that is quick. I got that story to you, in 45 seconds.
Right.
But it broke the ice with people. It's something I can do to introduce myself, and it's something to let you know we're going to have a little bit of fun today. The stories don't have to be long, and particularly in the business world where storytelling comes in. If you have clients who have experienced something with your product or your service, a testimonial is great, and you have those. But if you've got a story that really grabs you, that happened between you and them, that really personifies your company and talks about what your core values are, use it. Don't be afraid to use these stories. There's a place for them. And guess what? It's not about the length of the story. If you go a few minutes on a story, it's about keeping people's attention, engaging your audience, making them emotionally get invested, and making them give a damn.
I think it's for me when I have those circumstances come up, it's trying to provide too much detail. And I think that the message gets lost in the detail. I'm a very detail oriented person. I'm a Marine and everything's about detail. So I feel like in everything that I do, I have to be detailed. So in those stories, I'm giving details that really don't matter. They don't need to know what color shirt that kid was wearing in the grocery cart, right?
Right. You don't need to. And that's the thing. And it's funny that you say that because I listened to an interview that you did with, I think it was Terry's his last name, Bug.
Yes, Terry Bug.
You did with him. I really enjoyed it. And you talked about in there that you're not an analytical person. So I'm like, okay, maybe that's not exactly the case if you're breaking down details, because I can hear you telling the story I just told.
Right.
So this kid walked in wearing a pair of Nikes and he had on this blue shirt. It was kind of denim looking, but yeah, just look at what you're doing in the story and just start scratching things out and boil it down to its basics. Unless the kid being in the shoes or being in that, what he's wearing and what he's doing matters more. Put the focus in the story where it needs to go to get the most impact. And if you're talking, if I'm changing that story and I'm talking about, maybe I am talking about something about the clothing he's wearing. If it had to be important to the story, certainly add it in. But if not, just chuck it.
Yeah. The unnecessary stuff, just get rid of it.
Right.
Are people, excuse me, are people born good storytellers? Or like you said, I mean, you just gave some tips there. So can we be trained to be better at doing those things?
Absolutely, you can. Storytelling is natural. I mean, think about this. Think about some of the places in the world where certain tribes of people, certain cultures of people, their storytelling is what has kept that culture alive. They may not be as advanced as we are. So the stories that are passed down generationally, if you look at what we have in the world, music, movies, books, TV shows, storytelling. Everything we do is around storytelling, and you are a storyteller whether you think you are or not. Let me give you an example. You come home and somebody says, "How was your day?" If you're in a really bad mood, you might just go fine to indicate I don't want to talk about it. But if you start talking about your day, what are you doing? You're telling a story. Well, you're not going to believe what happened today. Bob went over to the computer again. I've told him 3 times not to hit that button, and Bob did it anyway, messed up the whole system for half the day. This happened. You go into a story. Storytelling is already in you. You just have to learn how to refine it.
I like that. Yeah. And I think I get caught up sometimes in, well, they don't know why I'm so upset because they didn't know the backstory. So now I'm getting caught up telling them about the backstory, which makes the story really, really long. You know what I mean? So like just again, going back to trying to get my point across and I end up, really making a long story out of it. Going back to meetings, because, just trying to wrap this up into like a whole business type issue here. I don't know too many people are like, sweet, we got a meeting today at 2:00, right? Nobody's excited about it. And there's a reason why, right? First, it's usually about stuff you don't care about. And then it's boring because the person giving the meeting just sucks at it. What are some ways to make regular business meetings more entertaining? And again, sticking with the keeping to the point, but also making it entertaining and interesting to be a part of.
One of the first things I'll tell you is what got me going on this road was years ago. I was at a meeting. It was a city council meeting in Evansville, Indiana. And we're sitting there, my reporter and I, and she gets a piece of paper and she draws on it and she taps my leg and I look down at it. And the piece of paper has a dot on it here that says the point. Over here, we are here. And the problem is people wander off of that. The biggest problem is when it comes to attacking that issue is a lot of people attack it what I call from the outside. They'll say things like, well, tell you what, let's fix this by having a 2-pizza meeting. We will have just enough people there that 2 pizzas can feed. Or let's have them all stand up. Because if they stand up, then they'll tire out quicker and they'll want to leave sooner. Or we'll have just the people there that we need to invite, which is always one that puzzles me because I'm like, I can't see somebody looking up and going, who the hell brought Bob in here from that department? He has no reason to be in here. You should just be inviting those people. So let's look at that scenario now. Now you've got a room full of pissed off people who are supposed to be there who are now mad because the person up front is droning. They have not been trained. And the problem with this is you have so much of this guided towards your C-suite, towards your middle management. They're the ones who get the love, so to speak, when it comes to being taught speaking skills, presentation skills, how to communicate better. But your staff are the ones who need it as well. If you want to make this problem go away, train everybody, because you're going to have somebody who gets in there who now has the skill sets they didn't have. If they were lagging behind in work, for example, you had them working on some project and they have to use a piece of equipment and they're not really familiar with it. What are you going to do? You're going to train them how to use that equipment because it makes them more proficient and more efficient. It's the same thing here, but it is so incredibly overlooked. And because of that, and nobody's doing it, your meetings are dragging on. Train your staff, your meetings will come down.
I like that. And going to training, right? I like that you brought that up. It is about training, just like anything else. You got to be repetitive, really work at it, make it a conscious effort. Your training, obviously in newscasting, being on TV or radio, where especially radio and podcasts, right? When most people are just hearing your voice, it's very, very important on how you use it, fluctuation, things like that. But also, like you said, getting rid of those mannerisms. Can you tell us about some of the things that you learned? What was part of your training to get to where you are now?
One of the key things for me was when I switched over to Toastmasters. I learned all kinds of things in working in television news. I've taught and trained over 100 reporters and photojournalists. But when I moved over to Toastmasters, I started learning that, hey, this stuff really fits with what I'm already doing. And as a result of that, the training that I got through there, I started noticing these things that they talk about. Ahs and ums are one of the things they talk about in Toastmasters. But I was looking at what they're not looking at. And I just had this thing the other day, and I'm not knocking Toastmasters. I love Toastmasters. I love my club. I said this the other day. I spoke at a district conference. But there's a lot of form over substance in that arena. And what I'm talking about is bringing more substance to the top. And the more of that you have, whether it's, if you're still trying to stick to that whole meeting thing you're talking about, instead of standing up there and pulling up a graph chart and reading it and putting up bullet points, and the reason they call them bullet points is because they're deadly. They kill your meeting. Instead of standing here and doing this, turn that off and engage me. Get some energy. Tell me a story. Make me laugh. Make me feel something. You've got to make me feel something, because if you don't, I'm not interested anymore.
So bring an emotion into it. Get somebody involved.
To.
Well, you brought up something there with the bullet points. And I like what you said about the bullet points too, because it's so damn true. Is PowerPoint, is it still relevant?
You've never met somebody more against any kind of a presentation like that than me. And this is from a guy who had to do one of those for about 7 months on the road. But I will say this, it was a damn good PowerPoint. But in addition to that, I added stuff to it. I'll get into that in a moment. To me, PowerPoint has become powerless and pointless because it's low-hanging fruit. Anybody can slap together a slide deck and stand up there and read the slide deck.
When you're self-employed, whether as an independent contractor or a business owner, when it comes to health insurance, you're on your own. Health insurance for the self-employed individual is imperative. When you get sick or injured, you aren't working and you don't get sick days. You may end up facing staggering medical expenses and loss of income. Health risks and uncertainties are a part of life. You can't always plan when you get sick, but you can be prepared for the financial aspect. The best way to be prepared against uncertain health risks is with the right health insurance plan. Call Sawyer Health Solutions today for your free consultation and quote. Allow us to put a plan together that makes sense for your situation. Call 239-677-9877 or go to our website at sawyerhealthsolutions.com. Protecting what's important to you is what's important to us.
Here's an example of that. I say example a lot. I need to get rid of that. That's a catchphrase for me. I'm just catching today.
Anyway, we're all learning.
Here's the thing. I had a lady that I know who worked in the school system, and she had to go to some sort of a training that was like an hour and a half, 2 hours away from her. She was going to be there all day, lose the time at work. It took her the time to go there. She's having to spend the time in this meeting, and she gets there. The speaker who gets up there, who's being paid, turns on a PowerPoint and proceeds to start reading it. At the first intermission she had, she went to the organizer and she said, "Look, I know how to read. Send me the PDF."
Right.
And she left. She was pissed because they were wasting her time. And this is all about not wasting time. That's the whole crux of what I'm doing, is about getting to the damn point and not wasting time. So when you have people who do this, think of it this way. Imagine you are wanting to learn how to walk a tightrope. If you have one that's 1 foot off the ground, how much practice do you have to put into that? How much research do you have to put into it to walk a tightrope that's a foot off the ground? None. You get on it, you wobble, you fall, you laugh, you get back on it, you try again.
Right.
I elevate that sucker to about 30 feet. Guess what's going to happen? You're going to care a whole lot more about learning about tightrope walking than you did before.
Yeah, the consequences are a lot
because
higher.
now there's more at stake here. You've got to look at it from a standpoint that there's more at stake. When you go into a meeting, people are giving you their time. This is a gift, man. It's not something they're ever going to get back again. And you owe it to them to not waste 1 second of it. And when you pull up a PowerPoint and do that, all you're saying to me is, and this is me personally, if it's not a very well done PowerPoint, and I'm not saying you can't use them, but you need to learn to use them better. If it's not a really well done PowerPoint and you're not really bringing the energy and making me care, then you're just making me go, you know what? You don't care about my time and you don't care about me. And that's what it's screaming at me.
Yeah, and I think that, PowerPoints a lot of times are a crutch. I know I've used them that way, right? It keeps you on track to, make sure you hit all the different points that you want to hit. But also,
but here's the issue with that. Sorry to interrupt you. Here's the issue with that. And I've seen this happen. I saw this happen with a veteran Toastmaster. Somebody had been in Toastmasters for years. This person got up there and they had this slide presentation all set to go for a half-hour presentation. 1 minute into it, slide deck went down. Now what happened was this person is floundering, and I mean bad, because everything that they had planned was tied to this. They had no backup plan. There was no plan B in place. And let me tell you, this is for everybody out there who's dealing with this. I'm telling you, if it hasn't happened to you, it will happen to you. I've worked with technology my entire career, and I can tell you one absolute fact. It is a junkyard dog, man.
Yes, it is.
It's not a matter of if I'm going to get bit. It's a matter of how hard it's going to bite you in the ass. And when it does, it's going to bite hard. And you're going to wind up losing whatever deal you're trying to make right then, or whatever persuasion you're working on, whatever your point is, because you just went completely into a tizzy, like you're all going off road and having a wreck.
Yeah. But on the same token, though, visual learning is a big deal, right? So a lot of times you do want those visuals to go along to maybe emphasize and put some accentuation on something that you're talking about. So when you say learn how to use PowerPoint in the right way, is that kind of what you mean? Like just use it to accentuate certain points that you really want to pound across, as opposed to using it as an outline?
It's a spice. It's a spice. It's the whipped cream. It's not the whole pie. Okay. You've got to learn that when you have that PowerPoint, not to rely on it, not let it be your crutch. And you said the key word there, images. A picture's worth 1,000 words. Why? Because that's what they say it is. And it truly is worth 1,000 words. So rather than give me a graph chart and 16,000 bullet points or 2,000 words on the screen, what if you showed me an image? What if you showed me something that grabbed me? What if you showed me something that got my attention? And when you're not on that PowerPoint, be the one back in front of the camera. Be the person in the audience, whether you're virtual or whether you're live. If you're doing it on camera, the thing that just annoys me to no end is when somebody throws up a PowerPoint and I never see them again.
Right.
To the end of it. I need to have this communication and action with people, this reaction and action with people. And doing that by itself is not enough, even then, if it's very well done. You want to have those spaces where the attention comes back to you. Yes, I understand about the visual learning. Use that, but make it a much shorter presentation and make it a much more powerful presentation than you would normally.
Okay. Yeah, and that makes sense because you want to keep them engaged, but you want the attention to be on you. You're the professional. There's a reason why you are the one up there speaking at that particular time. If the biggest piece of advice that you could give, right? Because I know that we can give tips. And if you want to throw some more tips out there, by all means, I don't know what ones to really ask you about it. So if you have more, throw them out there. But if you have like the one piece of advice that you could give a new manager who's just got thrown into this role for the first time where they're going to be speaking in front of people, what is the most important tip that you can give them?
I'll give them two pieces of advice. The first one is rehearse. If you know you're going to be speaking in front of people and you need to get some points across, don't try to fly by the seat of your pants because it's not going to work well for you. You need to rehearse. There's a lot of other steps that go in there, but that's one of the key things that I would tell them is they need to rehearse what they're doing. When you've got somebody who's coming in new to this, a lot of people, I think they have this thing in the back of their head where they're like, It's got to be perfect. I have to be perfect on this. Let me explain what perfection is, at least the way I see it and the way I teach it and what I train. Perfection is what you're striving for, but not in the way you think. Perfection, to me, lies between passion and connection. If you've got a passion for what you're talking about and you've got the ability to make a connection with that audience, there's where your perfection lies. It may not be the smoothest. You might have some ahs and ums in there. You may have some moments where you get off track a little bit. It's okay to do that a little bit. But if you go in there and you haven't rehearsed it at all, and I tell people when they rehearse, do not sit at your table. Do not sit in front of your computer and go, oh, I think I've got this down. And yeah, I've got that. That's not how it's going to work. You have to stand up. Like I tell people when you were a kid and you grab the brush and pretend you're singing in front of an audience or accepting an award or whatever in your bedroom and you're waving to the crowd or whatever it is you're doing. It's the same thing when you're speaking. Rehearse. You've got to get off your ass and on your feet because your feet know more. What do I mean by that? Let's use that manager as an example. If he were going to explain something to people and he gets up there and he forgets that moment, if he's doing that and he's rehearsing, he may get up there and he has his notes over here and he's trying to get this down and he goes to say it and he forgets it. But rather than go to his notes, something else from the back of his head comes flying in, another story, another something that really drives home this point that he would never have thought of sitting on his ass in front of a computer. If he gets up and he's working, now what happens is he's got that. He jots it down on his notes. He may or may not use it. But if he needs it, it's there. And it's going to be one of those things that's going to save him. And the more you do this, the repetition of it, the more those moments happen when you're live. So you don't have to worry about having that right then. It'll happen naturally for you.
So don't have the crutch too readily available.
Exactly.
Like you want to, I mean, you want to make sure that you have something there that you can fall back on, so you're not completely lost, but don't have it so readily available that you take out the natural part of the flow of the conversation.
Right. And you can have those there. And I tell people this about notes. Notes are not, if I'm using notes, they're not for me. They're for you. They're for my audience because I'm there to make sure I tell you certain things and I want to make sure I stay on track. And I go back to Alan Weiss. I've quoted him a lot on this. Alan Weiss, the last time I'd heard him talk about it, makes $30,000 for a 1-hour keynote. And the man uses notes. If he can use notes, so can I, so can you, so can everybody. But he doesn't go over and stand there and read them. That's the difference. He just uses them. He'll pause. He'll walk over. He'll flip. He'll come back and he'll start his point because he's using it as a tool to make sure the information is there, not as a crutch.
So you're not using it as a script,
right?
For what you're talking about. So the difference between being in a meeting and hosting a meeting or leading a meeting and being a keynote speaker, because that is something that I hope to do in the future. I'm working on writing a book. Did you hear it? I just did that. Dang it.
Notice what happened. You caught yourself.
I caught it.
That's what's happening right now. You're starting to hear it.
So I'm getting ready to write a book, and I want to be able to utilize the subject matter of the book for public speaking purposes, right? Keynote speaking. What are the differences between being on stage and talking to a big audience in that type of situation versus maybe a meeting of, 6 or 8 people? Is it the same? Should you handle it the same, or is it different?
No difference. There's none. If you get comfortable speaking and you're able to do it well and you're able to present well and you have that connection with the audience and the ability to connect with the audience, it won't matter if you're talking to one-on-one or a room of 1,000. It's the same material. It's the same approach. Give you another example. Geez, there I go again saying example. I got to stop that. Anyway, I get those on a roll of those every now and then.
Rubber band on the wrist.
Comical. Oh, dude, I got on the word comical years ago. I was using it, and the guy who sat next to me in the cubicle, he said, I'm going to break you of that word today. You use it all the time. I said, no, I don't. He said, yeah, you do. And throughout the entire day, every time he would talk to me, he goes, oh, that's comical. Guess what? He broke me of the word in a day.
There you go.
But it's no different talking in front of one person or talking in front of 1,000. The techniques are still the same. What I did is I've done speeches for my club at Toastmasters where there's maybe 4 or 5 of us there on a day. I have given speeches in front of audiences when I was on the road doing stuff for a company that I was talking about stem cells. Don't ask how I got there. But I was working for a company and I was talking about how you can use stem cells for helping you with your pains and illnesses. And I had audiences anywhere from I'd have 5 or 6 in it to having sometimes as high as 20 or 30. Then I did my TED Talk, which was in front of a much larger crowd. But all the way through, the same techniques that I teach and that I use fit for all of those.
And that's important for me to know because I've been working on using my voice, right? Because you want to animate your voice. As you can tell, I talk with my hands, but I think that that's important if you're on a stage. You don't want to stay in one place and just, kind of hover in one spot. You want to welcome people in, make yourself approachable, I guess is the word, that you want to be approachable and that you seem likable while you're talking, because I think that brings people in.
Oh, absolutely. But one thing I want to back up on there, you said something that does make me come to another point that I want to share. This is important for you particularly. You're doing a book. You're going to be talking about your life experiences, I'm assuming.
Mm-hmm. A few.
Okay. Here's one of the biggest things I see wrong with people who are speaking, whether that's in a meeting, whether that's on a stage, whether that's at a chamber event, a TED Talk, doesn't matter. You don't see it so much in TED Talks, but you see people come out and the first thing to do is, well, I want to thank everybody, for having me here today. I appreciate it. Bob, thank you for inviting me to this meeting. I just want to thank Margaret over here. Margaret, I'm going to tell you that pie you made, that's some awesome pie right there. This is a beautiful facility, is it not? Be sure and tip your wait staff. Guess what? Nobody gives a shit.
Yep.
They simply do not give a shit about any of that. When you come out, what you need to do is you have to say right off the top, something that gets their attention. I call it a nose punch. It can be a light nose punch. It can be a hard nose punch, but you've got about 5 to 10 seconds to get their attention. So you better grab it the moment you hit the stage. Say your thank yous later. You can, if you're accepting the handoff at the lectern up there at the podium and somebody shakes your hand, you can say thank you to them quietly. But the moment you turn and address that audience, the first word out of your mouth needs to be something. The first sentence out of your mouth needs to be something that makes them put their phone down and go, what's this guy about? I need to listen to this person.
Give me an example of that. You've done a TED Talk, and TED Talks, I love these, right? Because they're short. Yeah. Right? These aren't long speeches. Generally, 15 minutes or so?
I did 18 minutes.
18 minutes. All right. So 18 minutes, that's really not that long of a talk when you're passing some really strong information or whatever the case is for your particular talk,
right.
Which, again, get to the damn point, right? Because you only have so much time. What is some of your opening lines that you would use to be able to grab attention? Does it have to be subject related to what your speech is about?
No, it has to be in connection to what you're talking about, and it's good if it is connected to it. If it goes into a story or leads into something you're about to make a point on, absolutely. And everything that's in there should be all interconnected in some way anyhow. But I'll give you an example of this that's outside of doing it on a stage that was very, very powerful. I wrote the president and CEO of AT&T. My father had been given 6 months to live. He was, told he had whatever was going on with him, and that was about as much time as he had. The phone number he had for his house phone was the only phone number I'd ever known. I wanted this phone number, but I found out my dad had ran up a $3,000 bill on this number. There was no way I'm going to get this number. I talked to AT&T. It's locked up. They've sent it to collectors, but what I knew that they didn't know was that my dad had just filed for bankruptcy, so they're not getting anything. And I was told this number's locked. You'll never get it. I decided to sit down and write this guy who's the head of AT&T. And the very first thing I said in my letter to him was, would you help a son get his dying father's phone number?
That definitely.
The second thing I said to him was, I'm appealing to you as a human being, not as the CEO of a company. The next morning, I sent that out at 6:47 at night. The next morning, I get a phone call from a lady who's connected to his office who said, he's told her, make this happen. And in 3 weeks, I had the phone number. That's a nose punch. I nose punched him right away with something to get his attention. I didn't go, dear sir, thank you very much for taking the time to blah, 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 blah. I dove right in. That can happen whether that's in an email, that's in a text form, that's in a letter, that's on stage, that's in a meeting, that's in front of a chamber. I don't care who it's in front of. Come out of the gate and punch them in the nose.
How do you end it? Because an ending has to be pretty impactful as well. How do you end a speech, a meeting, a letter?
What I do in something like that is I try to come around to what's called a bookend. Whatever I open up with, that very first thing that I'll throw in there, I try to come around back in some way to that to tie into the first point that I made. A lot of people think that speaking is, doing like the 3-point speech you used to do in school. I'm going to give you an open, 3 points, and a close. It's not like that. You don't have to go that route. But I do like to come back in and tie into whatever I said at the top.
I like that. Yeah. And because it kind of brings the whole, whether you're talking for 18 minutes or an hour and 18 minutes, it kind of brings everything together and should, at least in my opinion, summarize what, and I know you just said like, the opening, the 3 points and the closing, but it should kind of summarize what you were speaking about for the last 18 minutes or for the last hour and 18 minutes. Should it not?
I would call it summary because I don't need to summarize it. You've heard it. I know there's that saying out there, you're going to tell them, you're going to tell them, then tell them, and then tell them you told them. But you don't have to tell them you told them in a rehash. Let me recover everything.
Okay.
If you just come back in and going back to my TED talk, you mentioned that I opened up with a glass in my hand and I ended on that glass. That was my connector. What was going on with this glass in my TED talk is what tied the two ends together.
Okay. And again, there's the visual too that we were talking about earlier, without being a PowerPoint.
Exactly. You can use other things beside a PowerPoint. You can use a prop. You can use your body. You can use your voice and inflection. If you're telling a story and you're talking about your aunt, then talk like your aunt. Talk about how she went and did this and she went over there and you know what I mean? Liven the story up, man. Just have the energy and draw people in. Throw humor in. Humor is so important. Throw some of that in as well.
Before we go, what is, we've been given some pretty good tips. What's the kryptonite? What are some kryptonite things that you just got to stay away from? What are the things that make you cringe the most when you see or hear people doing it? How much time you got?
One of the things for me, man, I'll tell you, there's two. Going back to PowerPoint, unless it's really well done, that's one of my things that just is going to bore me to tears. But a big pet peeve for me, I was in a car dealership yesterday having my car worked on. And I'm sitting here, and in this ear, I've got some guy over here talking really loud to some woman, and I'm trying to read a book. I'm right over here. On this side, I've got a guy who's sitting at a desk, and he's on the telephone, and he's got an ink pen going.
We've all been next to that guy.
I just wanted to go over and kind of like, stick it in his eye. Because it's like, dude, please stop this. But for me, the one that just drives me nuts more than anything is what's called a tongue click. When people start off going, well, I want to talk about this and I want to do, and that little noise right there. It's like on a chalkboard, man.
I think that, sometimes when I've noticed that, because I've had some guests on that do that, and I can edit some of that stuff out there. I choose not to most of the time because I want to keep the conversation sounding
right,
natural. This is the way that person sounds. Hey, like it or not, here it is. It's almost like the replacement for the
It is.
When somebody's thinking, they're like, and then they kind of go, it's almost one of those types of mannerisms, isn't it?
Exactly. It is. It's another twitch that you've got, and it's something that's noticeable. And the problem is the person doing it, they don't hear it. They don't realize they're doing it. You point it out to them, and then they'll stop because they hear themselves doing it. Just like you stopped a while ago and said, oh, there, I said an ah. I said an You're going to catch yourself. They'll catch themselves too. But the first thing is you've got to be made aware that you're doing it.
You think that one of the best things to do, because you said about rehearsing, make sure you rehearse a lot, right? Because that repetitiveness is going to make you better at what you do.
Sure.
When you're somebody who's giving speeches a lot, again, whether it's meetings or actual speeches, keynote type things, should recording yourself and listening to it back be part of that rehearsal process so you can catch on some of those?
Absolutely. I talk about that. As a matter of fact, in the ebook on my website, there's tips on there that include playing it back and listening to yourself. Absolutely. You don't, like you said, we don't like our voices. Typically speaking, we don't like it. And there's things we won't hear. But the problem is, even when you listen to it back, it's sort of like I'm also a professional magician. And one of the things that when I'm learning something new, and it's all magicians do this, at the moment I'm doing the dirty work, that little move that I have to do, to keep myself from thinking I'm as bad at it as I think I am, you blink. It's just instinctful. You blink it out. So you don't see the move happen. You think you did it okay. Okay. Till you perform it and you go, oh crap, everybody saw that.
If I didn't see it, nobody else saw it either, right?
Exactly. And it's almost the same thing here. You're listening back to it, but you're not hearing that again.
Okay.
Because that's your natural way of speaking. So if you're going to do that, let somebody else hear the recording. Ask somebody who will be brutally honest with you.
That's the key. Not necessarily mom, right?
You ask them, do these jeans make my butt look big? They'll go, uh-huh. Make sure it's that person who'll tell you that.
So not your husband. Because
exactly.
We've all been trained to stay away from the answer on that one. No, honey.
I don't know, man. My wife, I told her a long time ago, I was like, don't ask me unless you want to know the answer.
I'm like,
and why do women ask guys anyway? I mean, we use granimals to dress. You look back at the old fashioned pictures in the 70s from the magazines. We did not know fashion. We still do not know in most cases, not all. And then women go, do these shoes match? I don't know.
I'm not even wearing socks right now. What are you talking about?
Exactly.
Lewis, thank you so much, man. It was a great conversation. I apologize for everybody listening at home. If you don't hear it in the final recording, my dogs are barking the entire first half of this thing. So I apologize to Lewis for that. Usually I'm a little bit more professional than that particular beginning of this thing. But if you wouldn't mind, tell the listeners how they can learn more, because this is something, again, that I've been working on. And I know a lot of people who are in my audience who are entrepreneurs or business people. As a business person, you have to give either speeches or presentations, right? If you're going to the bank and you're trying to give them a presentation on why they should give you money for your business, that is a presentation and it needs to be very well rehearsed and you need to be good at it.
If you're in sales, if you're in fundraising, you talk on the phone, you deal with the organization, you go out, like you said, talking about your company, anything you do, you are two things automatically. A leader, you're not a leader, you're a speaker and you're a salesperson. And this is great for people in sales because they know how to sell, but the first sell is them and they need to learn to sell themselves. And all you have to do is go to my website, which is www.gettothedamnpoint.com. The information's there. Contact me. I've got 15-minute consultation for free. Pop it in there. Call me up. Let's see if I've got anything that will help you in your organization. But everything I've been finding out as I've been going through this process is I probably do. So just shoot me a call.
Awesome. Lewis, thank you so much, man. This is fun. This is actually the first session that I've had about this topic. So I appreciate you taking the time out of your day-to-day to talk to us. And we've learned a lot for sure.
Well, thank you very much for having me. And I'm glad to be the first person to bring it to you.
Thank you for joining us this week. Go to our website at thebizreveal.com to catch all of our past episodes. We're available on all podcast apps, or you can watch any of our episodes on the Biz Reveal YouTube channel. I'm Craig Sawyer, and this is the Biz Reveal. Till next time.